You're listening to Consulting Logistics, presented by FreightPlus. I'm your host, Kyle McNaught. Thanks for checking us out. Well, it's June. Summer's here. Memorial Day up here in Massachusetts kind of sucked, especially when we were opening up because we had rain the entire time. But we're open, baby, so it's all good. But it is June, which is kind of that halfway mark through the year. And if you've been paying attention to our market transportation report that we put out at the end of every month, which our next one's going to be out as soon as this episode drops, you've gotten to see kind of a cool section of one of the modes we talk about, the Less-than-Truckload mode. And one of what we call it the Gula corner, because we actually have Chris Gula, our LTL kind of expert, our ops manager for LTL, provide his kind of information and knowledge. So what I wanted to do as we kind of hit that halfway point through the year is bring Gula on for this podcast. Chris Gula is going to talk about what's happening in LTL. What are the major issues we're seeing? Because if you're reading that transportation report, you know LTL isn't doing wonderful, would be my optimistic way of saying it. And then also, what does he realistically thinks on the horizon? Where are we going to go, right? We're opening up. Things are changing. What's he realistically kind of predicting for the rest of 2021? So without further ado, Chris, my man, how is it going, Gula?
Good morning, Kyle. Thanks for the introduction.
Absolutely cool, Chris. So for those of the listeners who don't really know you, give a little intro. I mean, especially the really cool, like your background. Talk a little bit about what makes you such an LTL kind of expert or kind of a really good subject matter expert for this mode.
I've pretty much grew up in the industry. I got four older brothers. My father was in it, spent the last 24, 25 years in the LTL space. Working my way up all the way to managing several large facilities for some LTL carriers.
That's awesome. And then where, I mean, you've maintained that. I mean, again, it's a family thing. It's also, you and I talk enough that like, I know like how much, like you live and breathe LTL. You love this stuff. You're sending us emails all the time like, hey, this is happening. But one of the interesting things about LTL is it is really relationship driven, even though it's one of those modes that, like you say, the top 20 companies kind of own a lot of the space. It's still about having really good relationships. Why is that so important for this mode compared to stuff like truckload or ocean or all those other modes? Why is LTL really that valuable?
I think it comes down to more touches, more communication.
Can you lower your audio?
It's such a daily interaction from the shipper to the carrier to the end user. It's a live, it's a live shipment, and somebody's waiting for it. Somebody's waiting for it to be picked up. Somebody's waiting to receive it. So it's just the overall touches and communication that are involved in LTL.
It's fascinating. I mean, we've had people from like people that have joined the FreightPlus have told little kind of horror stories of how much an individual company can affect LTL. It affect like how the whole mode operates. It's such a really interesting thing. You did a cool whiteboard that really explains sort of LTL cycles and stuff like that. So I really, really suggest everyone to go watch that. But before you go watch that, I want you to sit back and enjoy this conversation we're about to have, because we are in June, right? It's the 6th month of the year. Let's talk about it. How has LTL performed for 2021 so far?
Not good. It's been choppy waters. For well over 12 months, not just the first 6 months of this year. Let's go back in 2020, right? The LTL industry was turned upside down when COVID came, and it's been a struggle to recover. It really has. One word I would use for the LTL carriers on a positive note would be resilient. They've had to work through a lot of different things to satisfy the shippers and the customers, and it hasn't been easy. So you got to give them credit for how they have performed. While their service levels aren't where they want to be, the resiliency and just staying on track and keeping their heads above the water has been impressive.
Now, it's interesting. I mean, I'm a novice, right? I'm a marketer. I'm a dummy. Shoot videos is what I do. So I'm learning about this industry, but it seems it's interesting because a lot of the the way I kind of hear it is like a lot of people perceive LTL just like truckload. So when they think of like, well, how did COVID affect them? It's like, oh, well, rest stops were closed, this type of stuff. But the LTL, the whole way this mode operates is it is a people business. It is kind of having like the cycle moving. You need to move through the warehouse. You need to offload. You need to upload. You need to, I'm throwing out words I'm probably absolutely getting wrong here. But it seems like it did affect the pandemic affected this mode differently than people really perceived it. Am I wrong in that?
No, I'd agree 100%. Go back to the touches that we just talked about. Go back to the whiteboard we did several months ago. There's so much people involvement. And when you disrupt that cycle and you have COVID concerns and you're having to adjust the way you do business, and then you have the influx of all this volume that we've seen for the past 6 months, it causes strain on any LTL carrier. It really does. And you've seen that in the service they've been able to provide.
So help me understand or put this in perspective for me. How is what kind of like the past 12 months, right? We'll even take away just the 2021, but kind of COVID. How is this mode been affected compared to a normal, what 2019 was like? What's the differences? What are the ways that you've kind of seen this mode really be impacted?
So many moving parts, right? So in the LTL industry, you have more layers than any other mode. So you have anything, from a clerk taking the pickup call in the office, to the dispatcher in the office assigning the pickups and monitoring the deliveries. You have dock workers, and they're all in close, vicinity of each other. And when you take that ability to work side by side, it slows everything down and sometimes even brings it to a halt. And we keep referring to that cycle because that's one of my favorite things to describe in the LTL industry. But if you slow it down or bring it to a halt, it causes problems. And in the supply chain, LTL happens for a reason, right? They can't take the time to ship something rail. It takes too long. They can't do a truckload because they don't have enough volume to fill a truck. So they can't, use that, have that as a higher expense. So LTL is there for a reason, and it fills a need. But then you have so many disruptions. If you have those disruptions, it really messes with the supply chain.
Now, my picture, kind of what I'm guessing, right, is you're going to have the shippers or kind of the everyday kind of business going, well, vaccines out, the world's opening up. Like, why is LTL still struggling? But if they're smart and they're reading our transportation market report, which is also, by the way, out right now on our website, FreightPlus.io, they see that that's not really the big issues right now, right? The big issues, you kind of boil it up really well in this transportation. It's been a kind of Groundhog's Day because every month you're saying the same thing. The big issues are really a driver shortage, massive issue there, an equipment issue, and then the capacity crunch. So I want to dive into those issues in particular, and let's talk about it. And I honestly want to start with the big one. And in this recent market report, you did a really great deep dive. In fact, I was reading it right before we started recording this. And I was like, damn, Gula really brought the thunder with this thing. But you talk about it. Like, you're talking to the biggest, most movement happening in the LTL. And you even said, like, one of them had a goal in terms of driver shortage to add 1,500 drivers in 2021. They've added 850 year to date, but for various reasons, mostly retirement, it's only a net gain of 287 drivers. Talk to me a little bit about this driver shortage, because that type of stuff that's where you think like, well, oh yeah, they're dealing with what everyone is, that no one wants to get off the stimulus checks. But there's also the issue of retirement, of the drug clearinghouse. Talk to me, summarize what's happening driver shortage wise for me.
Yeah, you hit a lot of the key points there. So market updates ago, they, I mentioned that the average age of a CDL holder is 49 years old. That, I believe, is 7 years older than any other industry average. So you have older employees that are closer to retirement, and industry experts expect 2021 to be a record retirement year as far as the transportation industry, not just LTL, in general, CDL holders, right? And then you have the fact that you're not seeing carriers get a net gain. because of these retirements, because there's other industries out there that are attractive, whether it's, increased pay, better pay, or less wear and tear on the body, right? So you have people leaving the industry as well. And the way I pointed out in the market update is there's no bench. It's kind of like Major League Baseball with no farm system, right? So you don't have people on the bench waiting to backfill these retirements. So that they have to get creative, and that's what they're doing. They have to get creative to bring new people into the industry.
So is the no bench because of COVID, or is this sort of something that they've kind of seen coming for a while now, right?
It's been talked about for several years. COVID didn't help by any means. One of the big feeders or the minor league system was the driving schools, right? And 22% of driving schools, external driving schools, shut down the latter half of 2020 because of COVID. So you didn't have the schools producing CDL qualified employees to the market. And then you also have most carriers have an internal driving school. That had to be put on hold because you couldn't have two people in the same truck due to COVID protocol. The other influence is that just for a long time, it wasn't an attractive market for people to get into.
Right. Well, so, I mean, two things that just popped up in my head with the massive retirement numbers happening. How is that going to work with the internal driving school? Like if they're losing, it's not just bodies, but they're losing institutional knowledge. They're losing just just such vast knowledge. It's impossible to replace, right? It comes with years. It doesn't come with just read a book. How are they? I mean, especially with the ones you're talking to, how are they anticipating that? Or is this something that, oh crap, like we're not even ready to start thinking about this just yet?
It's an excellent point. I mean, I could honestly tell you my last 5-7 years that I was in a hiring role and managing a facility, that was a big concern. It's not just bodies in the seat, it's that knowledge that you're losing. A lot of these guys have been doing it for 20, 30, 35 years. The only thing you can do as a carrier at that point in time is find some good internal employees that take pride in what they do on a daily basis and have them be mentors, driver trainers, and really coach the young guys. It takes a lot of responsibility, not only just to obtain your CDL, but to go out there and drive, a truck day in, day out.
Yeah. And I mean, like you said, it's probably right now not the most kind of, as much as everyone loves supply chain and everyone kind of recognized that, which is a great thing, it still kind of sucked. Like it still wasn't great. You heard horror stories of all that type of stuff. And then you kind of, if you read our market report, you see stuff like the length of haul and ELD and all these other things that are affecting these other modes. You would think, or at least me being the dummy that I am, would think like, well, if truckload's kind of becoming like, hey, I don't want to drive that anymore. The ALD makes everything a nightmare. How do I I can't do what I used to do. So I'm like stuck on the road a lot more. You would think that the truckload would be that like better option of like, hey, I've got this license. Are we seeing that? Are we seeing truckload drivers move over to the LTL space, or is there, it's kind of like you're losing that freedom that they liked? Or am I just making up a whole thing in my head that makes no sense?
No, I think there's some good points there.
Just some. a lot of dumb stuff, but yeah, once in a while.
Truckload's still more attractive because keep this in mind. You're from point A to point B, right? So you're hooking up to a trailer, you're leaving. You're not getting in and out of the truck every day. Some people love the interaction with folks, right? But that interaction isn't always pretty either. So you got somebody that's had a bad day that you're delivering to, and sometimes that interaction is not the best. As a truckload driver, you're point A to point B for the most part. So you have less interaction with people and less physical type of work.
I see. I wasn't even thinking about that. When you talk about the physical, I'm like, what the hell is physical? I'm like, you're shifting and stuff. I'm not thinking about that. Well, you got to get out. Half the damn time, you're the one who has to offload. Like even like picking up this stuff, like you're doing physical work. I didn't even think about that, especially with the retirement. That makes a lot more sense now. Thank you for that. I wasn't even thinking that way. So what are, like, it says transition a little bit. What are people doing? I mean, you kind of talk about, like, as a hire in the LTL space, you're trying to find the really high valued employees. And it's funny, my wife works for kind of she works for MathWorks. It's like this whole crazy algorithm, right? Engineers and scientists, but they have, like, how they're trying to keep their really important, like, their high valued employees is like a very interesting incentive program that you just was telling me about. And that's the only reason it's even top of mind for me. But what kind of incentive programs are LTL drivers or carriers doing to try to not only attract the best and brightest, but retain their really good employees?
Excellent point. Retention is at the top of everybody's list. Recruitment and retention. Those are the two buzzwords right now to add drivers to all the carriers, right? So, as far as recruitment goes, you've seen, everybody's seen the news, the wages are increasing. There are sign-on bonuses. There are talks of guaranteed salaries. Never heard of it in my 25-year career where an employee is actually guaranteed 40 hours a week, right? So there's a lot of things they're doing on the recruitment side. Retention's a little harder, especially right now. We're talking about, kind of the mess that LTL is in, right? So everybody's working long hours, and that's not what these drivers want. They want to work 8 hours, 10 hours and go home to their families, right? We all do. So on the retention side, you have some carriers that are redesigning their whole line haul network to offer more home time. Obviously, more bodies. They're going to be able to shorten their P&D drivers' days a little bit and get them off the clock after 8 or 9 hours. But that's the overwork is a very, common theme out there right now. They're trying to reduce the workload for these guys, but they can't bring on the drivers to do it.
Geez, it sounds miserable. Because all that stuff, you're like, yeah, okay, that's how do I reduce the workload? Well, we're in the workload because we have to work on limited resources. Okay, well, where do we go from? It's wow. And you're talking to them. I mean, what's the feel like? What kind of, is it desperation mode? Or are they just like, listen, man, I'm in the round 8. I'm just so punch drunk right now. I have no idea what's really happening. I'm just trying to keep my head above water. What is kind of the mode for these LTL carriers, the ones that you're speaking to?
The most common theme I'm hearing, you just said, trying to keep their head above water. The good ones are keeping their head barely above water. Transparency comes into play. You can't be setting expectations with the shippers that you can't meet. Because if you're setting the expectations too high, then you're driving your workforce probably too hard to meet those expectations. So it really comes down to, like we talked about, communication and making sure everybody's on the same page. Transparency, right? Let them know what's going on. Try to do things at the workplace that make work a little fun, whether that's a simple barbecue, whatever that may be, to make sure the employees feel appreciated. And they have to communicate. The carriers have to communicate to their employees and let them know that, hey, we're working through this together. We're trying to bring on new drivers. We're trying to bring on new dock workers. We know we're pushing you guys hard, but we appreciate it. That goes a long way.
Yeah, it's got to be difficult. It's going to be the hardest thing, right? Because we're in this, we're highs, right? For a carrier, this is the best time to be a carrier, right? The capacity is so tight. You kind of get to charge what you want, but at the same time, you got to be the smart carrier because it's no longer like goldfish memory. People are remembering this stuff. It's going to continue, and you can't just kind of aim for that short dollar because you're going to lose the long war if you're just trying to do that type of stuff. But I mean, that's the importance, like you say, it's communicating that type of stuff. It's throwing cookouts where you have an employee named Nick, see if he can eat a hot dog in one bite. Spoiler alert, at FreightPlus, we have one of those. I'm only saying that because I hear his big goofy butt walking back and forth while I record this. So fun podcasting happening here. So that's one of the issues. And it seems like it's the big one, right? We talked about it. You talk about it in this upcoming report on freightplus.io if you go to there. But there's some other kind of issues you've also talked about. Talk to me a little bit about the equipment, kind of what's happening with that, and help that make sense to me.
Well, equipment, everybody has a little bit of equipment crunch. I would say it's, number 2 on the list of problems for LTL carriers and all carriers really. When you have this much volume in a network, trailers end up getting utilized for the wrong reasons, and at no fault of anybody's, it's their extension of the dock, right? You get backed up and you can't put 50 bills on the street. Those shipments are sitting on a trailer. That trailer is being used as a storage trailer, basically. So when your cycle is not running smoothly, then you end up tying equipment up, which you can't use for what it was purchased for. The other side of that is every carrier I talk to is purchasing new equipment, tractors and trailers. The problem is you got manufacturers that are going through the same issues that most businesses did with the COVID issues. So the production is slow, and now you have the materials that are driving up cost. I read something the other day, and it projected that a tractor and trailer, the cost to produce a tractor and trailer is up anywhere near around 30% right now. So again, more cost.
And it's tied directly into the main issue, which is sort of the driver shortage, or kind of the people shortage. It's not like, all this equipment is getting old and like the LTL like works on this cycle when they do this stuff. It's truly like, hey, we have to use this trailer as storage. And like, I think the other thing that kind of is eye-opening to me is that like, you think of like trailers on the road, you see them blown up in every Michael Bay movie, you think of it as like cardboard boxes, but that's not the case. There's really a finite amount of trailers that are out there for even an LTL carrier to really have. Is that correct? Or is like, how's that all kind of work out?
You only have so many manufacturers out there, and every carrier is going to those manufacturers with requests for this many trailers. I need 1,000 trailers, 2,000 trailers. You have some carriers that refurbish their equipment, and they have their own shops who are able to do that. Again, those shops were probably limited or reduced during COVID, so that slowed down as well. So you weren't bringing retired equipment back on or high cost repair equipment back on as quick as you normally would. And trailer manufacturing is tough. Think of what the specs need to be to haul 40,000 pounds down the road. They have to be built well, and right. And the carriers are all reaching out to the same manufacturers to get more inventory.
So this is one that it's kind of like, listen, we're just going to see this relieve itself kind of as we continue to open up. There's like more bodies there that can actually affect this and get more trailers out. So in theory, this is one that's a little more optimistic, or is this still something that, hey, it's probably going to be, it's all going to relieve itself at the same time?
I think they'll go hand in hand. As things open back up, you'll have, eventually people are going to come back to work, right? And when people come back to work, you'll have more drivers, you'll have more people producing trailers and tractors. You just got a lot of outside influence that all has to fall in line for things to smooth out. And I don't see that happening for a little while.
But I mean, the good news is it doesn't sound like there's this impossible thing, right? Like we talk about driver shortage and you're like, well, how do you do all this stuff when you're also trying to, like, you could sit there and be like, well, where do I start with this? Whereas like, all right, get more people back to work. People like, yes, I'm simplifying something that's extremely complex. Let's move over to the third kind of issue that we talked about, which is the capacity crunch. I mean, it's affecting even getting the trailers to them. What's happening with the capacity crunch, and how's it affecting kind of the LTL market per se?
If you look at most of the LTL carriers, they're reporting, depending on what metric they measure. So everybody measures revenue, tonnage, shipment count, right? All of them are reporting between 5 and 30% increases, depending on what metric you're looking at. And if you don't have the drivers, you don't have the equipment, a 5% increase can really bog you down, right? Right. So some of the things the carriers are doing is just limiting the amount of freight they will pick up at a certain shipper. And some of these is straining, some of this is straining relationships that have been 10, 20 years. They've been hauling freight for this shipper for 10 years, and now they have to tell them that they can only handle 3 trailers a day instead of 6. So it's changing the shippers' patterns as well, and they're having to make adjustments just on the fly, or find new carriers. And if the carriers are all suffering through the same capacity crunch, that's tough right now.
It sounds like it's almost the smart way to go about things for the carrier. It seems like, listen, take on less of the workload, let your team catch up, let the things start to kind of get back into this normal the way that it's made to operate. It seems like, okay, once we get there, we can start to take on more capacity, but it seems like it's a struggle to, it's probably a struggle to communicate that. I mean, the one thing like we have, like the cool thing about FreightPlus is we have a you. We have a Chris Gula. We have someone who's picking up the phone and talking constantly, like daily. Like you said, like I talked to the top 25 carriers it was top 25 carriers within the past 30 days, which is something like, okay, how does a shipper handle that? How do like you kind of get that type of network? Like, as you said, like at the end of the day, it's like, hey, I had this long relationship with you, and all of a sudden you're pulling this off the like a go to 3. How am I going to handle this? And I think it's all communication. It seems to me that like the capacity crunch, while it is a frustrating thing, seems to be the way that is going to help relieve some of this, in addition to driver retention, driver recruiting, more and more trailers and stuff like that. But it seems like you're saying it's this kind of big hurricane that's swirling around, but all these things kind of need to come together. But it's frustrating. I mean, what are you hearing from the carrier side of how the shippers are reacting to this? Because like you say, it can't be great.
No, there's like I said, there's been some strain on relationships, but I respect those carriers that are reaching out and communicating. To your point, that's more important. And I've said it in my last several market reports: is communication is key right now. And I wouldn't want you picking up my freight if it's going to sit in your yard for 2-3 days before you move it. I'd rather you give me options to see what else is out there. Might not be a whole lot of options right now, but at least give me that option, that choice to say, I can't ship with ABC carrier, but maybe I can ship with XYZ because maybe they have capacity in this lane. You have to be transparent right now. And the good carriers, the carriers that are keeping their heads above water that we talked about, that's what they're doing. The transparency and the communication is key.
What about the shippers? Are they like, are you hearing from the carriers like, hey, these shippers aren't even trying to figure me out, they're just pissed at me? I mean, listen, I know we've heard some horror stories that you've dealt with recently with this type of stuff, but like, how are shippers performing? What's a good shipper doing for the carriers during this time?
The good shippers are likewise, communicating and being transparent. Don't push the panic button on every shipment, right? That's a problem in the industry, always has been. But let's really have some legitimate communication on, hey, if this one takes 2 to 3 days to get there, I understand it's not hot. And then you let them know, and you communicate when you have something, in order that is really important. And, through our recommendations with clients is try to increase that lead time. Try to give the carrier more time, seeing how the cycles are and the capacity issues are what they are. Try to give more lead time, because a 1 day point right now is 2 days. It's just, that's factual. A 2 day point is 3 days. And only the carriers that everything's going right, and there's not many of them, is that published transit time still accurate.
Yeah, easier said than done, right? I mean, it's not like the shipper would absolutely want to get all this stuff. Like, I'd love to get all this thing. It's the other people in the organization. They're like, oh, wait, I'm not ready. Okay, let's go. You're like, oh, bro. So I think, yeah, it's a nightmare. I mean, again, this market report, usually when we do it next week, we'll do the one with Chris Peckham. It's usually just like, oh, this really stinks. So I hate to kind of leave on a bad note, but I think there is a little bit of optimism out there. So let's talk a little bit of what you think, kind of given your kind of long history in the industry / kind of how much relationships you built. What's the rest of 2021 gonna probably look like?
I think it's still going to be rough, but I think everyone's a little more educated now to what that rough looks like, right? So they understand that something's not going to be there next day. They understand it may take 2 days. So the tolerance is increasing, and you have to respect what the carriers are doing, right? And their efforts in the hiring and the retention, and bringing on new equipment. And you have a couple positives that I mentioned in the market report is, there's some things, a couple senators brought up another bill. It'll be the second time that it's been on the floor, but talking about reducing the driving CDL required age from 21 to 18. Right now, 18-year-olds can obtain a CDL, but it's got to be intrastate, so they can't cross state lines. And they're looking at a pilot program to possibly allow 18-year-olds with a certain amount of experience. Obviously, there'll be requirements there to be able to drive interstate. And they're also doing a lot of things to attract women to the transportation industry, which I think is fantastic. It's a small percentage of the overall CDL holders now. So if there's things that we can do as far as training and education and recruitment to attract more women in the transportation field, I think it'd be fantastic.
Absolutely. I mean, you're lifelong, right? You're like, oh yeah, there absolutely could be more, like more youth, more women, more everything. Like that's why keep gates up? Why make this a boys club? Like let's get everyone in here as much as possible. Yeah, Chris, I mean, there's a little bit of optimism in there, so I really enjoyed that aspect of it. But for those of you, I mean, you're an open book. You're always willing to talk. Literally, I was texting you at like 9 o'clock, or I was texting you late last night where I'm like, hey, can you do this podcast for me? You're like, yeah, sure, absolutely. So if someone wants to get in touch with you, if they want to kind of contact you, what's the best way to kind of reach out to you?
You can get me on LinkedIn. You can also get me via email at cgula@freightplus.io.
Perfect. And I'll include the link to your LinkedIn on the show notes. And like we said, we kept talking about it for some reason. But the May market report is going to be out today. So if you go to freightplus.io/May-market-report, you should be able to see it right there and download it. It's filled not only with stuff on LTL, but we talk about truckload, we talk about ocean, we talk about the PMI, we talk about fuel, we talk about air if it's something happened. We're talking about the transportation market report. And it's not just numbers, right? It's not to make you get cross-eyed looking at here's the rejection rate compared to this and all this stuff. It's what Gula does. It's what Chris does. It's what our team does. It's what we're hearing. It's kind of summarized versions and really awesome things that are just like what you're going to get out there is actually what's happening. It's not just reading, here's the numbers and here's kind of big things that like, this is for growing companies. This is for the smaller companies that actually need to know what's out there because you got to communicate this up and down your kind of your supply chain. So this is what's so awesome about our market report, freightplus.io. You can see it under a resources page. You can go to the website I said, and there's also a link in the show notes. So Chris, I can't thank you enough. There's so many other things I want to talk about. We'll have to wrap up 2021. You'll have to we'll do emergency pod if you're like, hey, it's clear. We did it, baby. Oh, we'll have a party podcast. We'll have Nick come back here, eat a hot dog and one bite for everyone. Really get this place going crazy. But I know I'm going to see you shortly or soon, hopefully, fingers crossed. So I'm excited for that, dude. You can't wait to see it at the new place, man.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate talking and educating everybody to what's going on right now in LTL.
Absolutely, Chris. Have a great day.
You too.
And that's our show. Have a question about LTL? Leave a comment and we'll be sure to get back to it. In the meantime, please subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching Consulting Logistics. I'm Kyle McNaught. Rock and roll.